Andrew Edward Kearns. I'm the Manager of Strategic Planning at Hawkesbury City Council. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now and about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And would you like to start by making an opening statement?
Yes, thank you. So I'm addressing the Select Committee today as a representative of Hawkesbury City Council and would like to thank the Committee on rural housing and secondary dwellings reform for this opportunity. As detailed in our submission, Hawkesbury City Council welcomes the inquiry, supporting efforts to improve housing options in rural and peri-urban areas, whilst also recognising the importance of maintaining productivity, amenity and character of rural areas. Hawkesbury City Council supports the introduction of detached dual occupancies and secondary dwellings in rural zones, and that's evidenced through Council resolving recently to prepare a planning proposal for detached dual occupancy development in certain rural and environmental zones, and that's actually very recently received a gateway determination from the Department of Planning to proceed, subject to conditions. Council is also seeking the introduction of the Standard Instrument Clause 5.5 in relation to secondary dwellings in rural zones as well. And in actual fact, whilst being sought through this current planning proposal, Council has been seeking to permit detached dual occupancies and secondary dwellings in rural and environmental zones since our efforts in 2015 and 2016, both of which did not proceed past the gateway determination stage. Council recognises the numerous benefits of permitting dual occupancies and secondary dwellings in rural areas, which will assist with housing affordability, housing diversity and options, supports multi-generational living and potentially strengthens the rural economy, provides cost-effective housing solutions without the need for subdivision and associated infrastructure. Through Council's research in preparing our current planning proposal to permit detached dual occupancies, this has identified there are a number of Sydney Metropolitan Councils and other councils in New South Wales that do currently permit detached dual occupancies in rural zones, and as such, the permissibility of such uses is not uncommon and can be managed through specific development controls, including DCP provisions, that particularly avoid fragmentation of land and avoid land use conflicts. I guess recognising that the primary use of that rural land is primarily, in most cases, primarily agricultural. In terms of potential impact on population, we don't really see a difference between attached and detached dual occupancies. Detached can provide additional housing and maintains a lower density appearance, can preserve rural character and minimises environmental impacts. And as mentioned earlier, potential negative impacts can be mitigated through DCP controls or provisions. So those controls could relate to siding, size, distance between dwellings, driveways and access, and in terms of environmental hazards, ensure controls in relation to flooding and bushfire management. And in closing, it's also worth noting that last week the New South Wales Government released the draft Sydney Plan and discussion paper, a new approach to strategic planning. That exhibition runs until the end of February next year, and depending on the timing of the findings and recommendations of this inquiry, there may be an opportunity to input into the draft plan and future state land use plan. In so doing, ensures a clear and consistent line of sight between strategic and statutory planning in New South Wales. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So it is possible now in the Hawkesbury to build a second dwelling, but as long as it is attached to the existing home. Is that correct?
Dual occupancy, yes, and I guess the distinction is dual occupancy and secondary dwellings. They're different land use definitions in the LEP. So dual occupancies are permitted if they are attached. Yes. And
so it's possible, but then how popular has it been? I mean, people don't want to live sort of right next door to another family. So has it been taken up?
Don't have high numbers in terms of applications in rural areas for those uses as yet, and that was in our planning proposal that we submitted to the Department of Planning. We sort of provided the numbers of going back to 10, 12 years in terms of numbers that we provided. Yeah, relatively low numbers that in terms of that. Yeah.
Now, about 10 years ago, the council did write to the planning department and did request that you would be permitted to build a second dwelling that was not attached. Was that request made to change your LEP, or was it the SEP?
So in 2015 and 2016, council applied for planning proposals for detached dual occupancies and secondary dwellings in all rural and certain environmental zones.
Yeah.
So it's through a council-led planning proposal. Yeah.
And why did the department refuse that request?
So both requests were didn't proceed past gateway stage of that because of concerns about regional flood evacuation issues, and potential increases in population and impacts to evacuation in the Hawkesbury and Nepean Valley.
Well, we know that the Nepean, Hawkesbury has flooded for hundreds of years from time to time, but I mean, it's quite a big council and some of it's a long way away from the river and elevated. So what did you think of that decision by the planning department? Do you think that was too arbitrary to make that apply to the entire council area?
You're right. There's I guess a significant portion of the local government in the area that is not directly flood affected. Obviously, there's some areas that, whilst they're not directly flood affected, they do have secondary impacts from flooding in terms of isolation, cutting off of services, and so forth. So, but I guess dealing with the matter on such a broad scale, I guess we did find problematic. Yeah.
And how do you feel about if these reforms do come in and people were in your area allowed to build a detached home? How does the council feel about the situation of raising rates? Would you ideally like to see an increase in rates if there was two homes on the one property?
Look, I'm not an expert in terms of rates, so my expertise is in terms of strategic planning and policy and strategy. So rates I won't comment on. Yeah.
I understand. Mr. Deputy Chair, do you have some questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Kearns, for your attendance here today. I'm just interested in terms of the decision you made with respect to C3 and C4 as well for the policy to apply to those lands. Can you just walk us through what sort of considerations the council made in making that determination?
Yeah, so that's a consistent approach that we had in our 2015 and 2016 planning proposals, include the rural zones and both of those environmental zones. Essentially, the uses that are permitted in those zones includes dwellings and dual occupancies, so we thought there was merit in proceeding on that basis.
So dual occupancies are already
if they're attached, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, the attached dual occupancies at present?
Yeah.
Okay. And with respect to the appetite that there exists in the community, how many, now that you're looking at changing the policy and gone through the gateway determination to have detached secondary dwellings, do you think there's a lot more interest in landholders proceeding to have a secondary dwelling on their property in a detached setting?
Yes, definitely. So obviously since the council resolution to proceed with that planning proposal, there's been an increase in the number of inquiries about when people can potentially make an application for those uses. Obviously it's still a process to go through with the LEP amendment, and but yeah, there has been a marked increase in inquiries in that respect.
And so when do you expect this to now be in place following your gateway determination?
So we have, as I say, very recently received the gateway determination. That includes a number of requirements to update the planning proposal and supporting documentation, also referral with a number of public agencies as part of that process, and then public exhibition. Council's been provided until August next year to finalise that LEP amendment, but it's obviously in our interest that we proceed through that process as quickly as we can. Yeah.
Thank you. And now, while it will be permissible in those zones, applicants will still have to go through the development application process, will they? Or?
Yes, so this is basically to make those detached dual occupancies and secondary dwellings in the rural and environmental nominated environmental zones permissible, so we'll go through a development application process.
And you heard the evidence before of Mr Mummy with respect to modern methods of construction or manufactured homes. What's the approach of Hawkesbury Council when it comes to such dwellings?
I guess there's similar challenges. Obviously, we're dealing with the same state legislation in terms of the manufactured homes being under separate legislation. Obviously, previous witnesses sort of talked about the challenges as an applicant, but it's also challenges as a regulatory authority as well, with dealing with different legislation and different requirements for land use and for the buildings through the manufactured homes. So I think there is the opportunity to potentially look at some sort of legislative reform in regard to how manufactured homes are dealt with. Yeah.
And does Hawkesbury Council take the approach or the view at the moment that they are permissible in terms of manufactured homes?
So for manufactured homes, we have a local approvals policy responding to the Local Government Act. So the particular challenge for us is where there is interest in manufactured homes. They've primarily been on the floodplain, and particularly as part of caravan parks, so they're obviously heavily flood affected, and our local approvals policy has a number of criteria that needs to be considered and responded to by any applicants under that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Kearns.
Ms Higginson, do you have some questions?
Thank you. Mr. Kearns, I just wanted to raise about the concerns that the department put to you in relation to the planning proposal. The evacuation capacity of certain parts of the Hawkesbury LGA is very real, isn't it?
Most definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I know that I had the benefit of being on a previous inquiry a couple of years ago that was after some of the flooding, and was taken to a number of locations, and it was quite... I'm from Lismore, so I know a lot about flooding, but it was... I couldn't believe some of those areas and what the matters that you as a council had to grapple with in terms of proposed increases of population in certain areas. Was there ever any initiative on part of council to go back to with an altered planning proposal about limiting perhaps some of the areas where the secondary dwelling could apply in the LGA, or was it just kind of shelved for now?
Yeah, so the 2015 and 2016 planning proposals were across the whole LGA, and they were the ones that the department didn't allow past the gateway determination. As part of our LEP review planning proposal that we have, we looked at that on the basis of applying those provisions above the flood planning level, so above the 1 in 100. And I guess for context, for Hawkesbury, particularly in around Richmond and Windsor, our 1 in 100 flood level is in the order of 17.3 metres, and our probable maximum flood is now over 30 metres. So we're talking about some very significant depths of floodwaters that we're talking about. And the state government, the Resilient Valley, Resilient Communities strategy for the Hawkesbury and the Nepean Valley actually describes our valley as probably the highest flood risk in New South Wales, if not Australia.
Yeah, thank you. And your submission makes it very clear that where you are proposing that potentially second dwellings would be applicable in particular zones, you say, however, development consent is something that should be in the mix with this because of all of these variations and factors.
Yeah, certainly for, there's I guess a number of environmental hazards, particularly flooding for us, but obviously bushfire hazard that I think are critical. But I think for local government areas, there's enough distinction between the rural areas of different local government areas to warrant having nuanced controls for each local government area. That would obviously be through development control plan provisions, and that then allow assessment of applications under that particular development control plan. Yeah.
Thank you. And we've heard, maybe the chair put this to you, but do you think that there is any role potentially for a state environmental planning policy or do you think it's best done with the LEPs and the DCPs?
I think through the LEPs, but I mean there is obviously the opportunity for an overriding step that amends all LEPs rather than each council having to go through an LEP process. So that if there were I guess findings from the inquiry that made recommendations in terms of certain provisions, they could essentially be applied through an amending step that amended all LEPs rather than each council having to go through a process to do that.
I see.
Yeah.
So like an enabling step
Yes,
to then
yes.
operationalise.
That's right,
Fantastic.
yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really all I had. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Sorry. One final thing.
Please.
Just in terms of Hawkesbury, how do you have biodiversity mapping overlays?
Yes.
And in
Yep.
your biodiversity mapping overlays, do you consider them up to date, fit for purpose, and proving to be well informing overlays?
Yes, so we've had some very recent mapping and work that's been undertaken in the last 12, 18 months that is very up to date and is very fine-grained detail
Great.
in terms of that, yeah.
And sorry, just one other final thing. I think you are the area that is first cab off the rank in terms of the Reconstruction Authority's adaptation.
Disaster adaptation plans.
That's right.
Yes.
Is that, how are you going with that? Where are you up to?
Well, obviously, the Reconstruction Authority is preparing the disaster adaptation plans. I think it's been delayed somewhat, so we're quite keen to see where that lands, and also understand that they have taken out the land use planning controls from that process and undertaking that as part of a separate process. So there'll be an adaptation plan, but the land use planning will be dealt with separately. Yeah.
And do you have, is there anything information you've been provided about the rationale for separating those two tranches of work?
Look, it's probably just the complexities and challenges that do exist. I mean, Hawkesbury and the Nepean Valley, it is quite a different valley in terms of the impacts of flooding within the valley. Penrith, for example, a lot of the flood is contained within the banks of the river. It's only sort of higher events that it spills out over the banks, whereas when you come to the Hawkesbury, it basically you end up with the bathtub effect, where the floodwaters just spread out so far.
We just need some plugs, don't we?
Well, yeah, that's yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kearns.
Thank you. Mr. Vaz,
Thanks,
some
Chair.
questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kearns, for appearing today and for your evidence so far. I wanted to ask you about the introduction of the new planning proposal with regards to detached dual occupancies. I think you're aware the committee's undertaking some site visits this afternoon out in the Hawkesbury. In terms of areas where they have on-site effluent management, so septic systems, has there been consideration for how that will interact with the new planning proposal with relation to dual occupancies?
Yeah, so the gateway determination that we've received from the Department of Planning has required us to prepare a draft development control plan chapter, and that will be one of the considerations as part of that. There's a whole raft of other considerations as part of that chapter, but obviously servicing both in terms of sewer and water treatment on site, whether it's obviously preferences for on-site treatment as opposed to pump-out type systems. Yeah.
In terms of the secondary dwellings, I noticed your submission also suggested clear differentiation between the two, that's on page 3 of your submission towards the bottom, in terms of the term second dwellings, which conflate dual occupancies and secondary dwellings. Is there any suggestions that you have for the committee in terms of better trying to differentiate between the two? Because it seems to be consistently coming up with the evidence we receive from councils whereby secondary dwellings have to be, or in many cases, need to be at that subordinate size, as you've referenced in your submission, but dual occupancies seem to have more flexibility, opportunity perhaps. So it's interesting as to why more people aren't using that as an avenue to get their sort of development or secondary, additional property on their house.
Yeah. So obviously these particular terms are standard instrument definitions, so every council has to apply those definitions. So each council doesn't have definitions for each of those uses. So I guess for the committee to understand that there are distinct differences between those defined uses, the secondary dwelling versus the dual occupancy. As you say, the secondary dwelling is more of that subordinate nature, whereas there's a bit more flexibility with the dual occupancies. Yeah.
And so with Hawkesbury Council, what is currently permitted in terms of secondary dwellings?
Secondary dwellings is primarily made permissible through the housing SEP, so in terms of, and that's primarily limited to more urban areas rather than rural areas. Yeah.
I noticed you've also provided us with a helpful table describing some of the councils that currently have the detached dual occupancy permissibility in rural and environmental zones. There seems to be many differences, and it's interesting to see it's quite a diverse range of councils. Have you any suggestions? So the state government obviously could look to perhaps play a role in facilitating that or making that easier for local councils, but there clearly still needs to be that localised decision making. So are there ways that the committee could look at suggesting, for example, a mechanism to encourage more councils to take up that opportunity?
Yeah, so I think there is opportunity for model development control plan type provisions relating to these types of uses that could be applied by councils, and if there was a decision by the state to include all of these, uses as permitted uses through an overriding SEP, then obviously that model code would assist councils in responding to that.
And in your submission, you also seek some clarification around the scope of this inquiry, particularly regarding the inclusion of outer metropolitan local government areas. That's something that was highlighted, I think, also in the submission from the New South Wales government. Do you think that we need to take a somewhat different approach when looking at the outer metropolitan versus some of those more rural councils, or should it be just something that we open up to all?
I think it's just in terms of clarity, in terms of what specific local government areas these findings or recommendations would relate to. Yeah.
Okay.
So that there's no ambiguity in terms of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Well, I've just got one last question. That is, across New South Wales, there are reports that there's a lot of unauthorised second dwellings in existence already. Is that much of an issue in the Hawkesbury area?
Potentially, I don't have any figures around that, and it's not something that we, in an active sense, pursue on a compliance regime. Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear. You're not actively persecuting them. But if the proposed change to the SEP make the current unauthorised dwellings legal, for lack of a better word, would your council grant amnesty to these dwellings?
I think council would certainly consider that. I don't know what the outcome would be, but there'd certainly be an appetite for consideration of that. Yeah.
I'm pleased to hear that. What would be the mechanism for that? Would that be like a resolution of the council, or how would we go about giving these people certainty about what the physical reality is?
I think, for us, it would be a resolution of council. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Kearns, well, look, thank you very much for coming along. We enjoyed your submission, and we will be visiting your wonderful local council area later this afternoon.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.